Hey guys, tonight we begin with the twisted theatrics of the Roman Colosseum. You're standing on the hot sand, the roar of 50,000 spectators buzzing in your ears, the sun beating down on your borrowed helmet. You see your opponent, and your stomach drops. He's twice your size, armed with a trident and a net, while you're clutching what feels suspiciously like a sharpened soup ladle. This isn't a sport, it's a spectacle, a state-sponsored performance of chaos, where the only rule is to make the emperor smile. You probably won't survive this, not because you aren't brave, but because fairness was never part of the script. The crowd wants a show, not a fair fight. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Roman Colosseum was not designed for sportsmanship. It was designed for spectacle, and also, possibly, as a way for emperors to avoid doing actual paperwork. Today, we have stadiums for soccer. The Romans had stadiums for chaos. If you walked into the Colosseum expecting fairness, you'd be about as disappointed as someone who brought a picnic to a thunderstorm. The crowd wasn't looking for balance. They weren't here to see who fought best. They were here to see who fell best, ideally in the most theatrical way possible. Bonus points for flailing arms and tragic facial expressions. Let's be honest, the Roman definition of entertainment was robust. A perfectly matched fight between two trained gladiators? Sure, that happened. But far more common were the opening acts, criminals, captives, or very unlucky people who happened to owe the wrong senator money. These folks were given the equivalent of a sharp spoon and told to make it dramatic. And dramatic they made it. The Colosseum wasn't just a stadium, it was a form of civic therapy. Life in ancient Rome could be stressful. Plagues, grain shortages, and the occasional fire. Watching someone else have a really bad day in a controlled environment was how people coped, and it was free. Funded by the emperor, the games were a very public, please like me gesture. You got grain, a seat, and a view of someone running from an angry elephant. What more could you want? Even the architecture encouraged inequality. The emperor had the best seat. Senators got cushions, and everyone else got a stone bench and sunstroke. The actual people in the arena, they got an audience. So, fairness? Not exactly the design priority. This wasn't a fencing match. This was ancient Rome's version of dinner theatre, if your dinner included fried dormice and the play ended in screaming. If you were a participant, you weren't measured by your win-loss ratio. You were measured by how loud the crowd got when you tripped over your own foot and fell directly into a net. Nothing says public service quite like forcing an untrained civilian to fight a heavily armed professional in front of 50,000 strangers. The Romans had a word for this entertainment, and while we have game shows and cooking competitions, they preferred something with slightly more risk and significantly fewer rules. Enter the gladiator versus amateur match, a charming tradition where a trained killer faced off against, say, a baker with a sword or a bureaucrat with an existential crisis. These weren't just one-off mistakes, these were planned. Sometimes the amateurs were volunteers, free people known as octorati, who signed up for the promise of fame or to pay off debts. Sometimes they were condemned criminals, and sometimes they were just guys who really should have read the fine print on their latest loan. Gladiators, contrary to modern movie logic, weren't all enslaved nobodies. Some were volunteers, some were celebrities, and all of them were highly trained. They lived in schools called eludi, had coaches, doctores, and were basically professional athletes, except with more armor and fewer endorsement deals. Now, imagine pitting one of them against someone who learned sword fighting from watching shadows on a wall. The result was predictable, and that was the point. This wasn't about suspense, this was about spectacle. The audience didn't want a fair fight. They wanted to cheer for the obvious winner while pretending the other guy had a shot. It was the ancient Roman version of watching a squirrel try to drive a chariot. And for the amateur, well, they had options. Option 1. Survive long enough to be mildly impressive. Option 2. Survive long enough for the crowd to feel sorry for you. Option 3. Get hit so quickly and dramatically that the audience laughs and the emperor nods in approval. If you were particularly charming or dramatic, you might even earn a reprieve. Romans loved a good underdog story, especially if the underdog was bleeding just the right amount. But most of the time, the outcome was settled before the match began. The crowd knew it. The fighters knew it. Even the guy sweeping the sand probably knew it. The professional gladiator was an expensive investment for his owner, or Hellenista, and you didn't. To risk a prized asset against a nobody, unless the odds were overwhelmingly in your favor. The amateur was there to make the star look good, to be the before picture in a very violent after demonstration. It was less a competition and more a live-action advertisement for the gladiator's skill, a brutal but effective way to build a fighter's public profile and keep the fans cheering. Let's say you're accused of a crime in ancient Rome. Maybe you stole something. Maybe you looked at the emperor's statue a little too long. Maybe your neighbor just really doesn't like you. Congratulations. You now qualify for a special appearance in the Colosseum. And by special appearance, we mean you're going to be introduced to a lion. Up close, personally, and probably without warning. The damnatio ad bestias, or condemnation to the beasts, was a Roman tradition. That asked the important question, what if our justice system was also a zoo? It was Rome's solution to everything from theft to treason. Throw the accused into the arena, open a gate, cue the music and the panic. This form of execution was considered a spectacle for the lower classes and was a common feature of the games. The lions weren't ordinary cats either. They were imported, often from North Africa, and treated like star performers. They got better transportation than most citizens, and sometimes better food. The prisoner, meanwhile, got a tunic and a vague sense of doom. No armor, no weapon, occasionally a stick, because nothing says fairness, like handing someone a twig and telling them to make it look exciting. This wasn't a fight, it was a message. The empire didn't just punish you, it made you part of the show. The more dramatic your final moments, the more the crowd cheered, the more the emperor smiled, and the more everyone forgot their rent was overdue. And yes, people brought their children. Because why go to the forum when you could teach your kids valuable life lessons like don't commit fraud or you'll be lunch? Sometimes the condemned surprised everyone. They ran, they dodged, they climbed things. There's at least one account of a man playing dead so convincingly that the lion lost interest. Unfortunately, the crowd didn't. They made sure the show went on. If you're thinking this seems excessive, the Romans would have agreed, but only if you suggested not using lions. That would have ruined the aesthetic. This practice was so ingrained that it wasn't officially abolished until AD 681. It was a stark reminder that in Rome, justice wasn't just blind, it was hungry. So, let's say the lion match is over, and the crowds have had their fill of seeing unarmed prisoners make friends with fate. What's next? Naturally, let's arm some people and send them back in, but with more animals and weirder ones. Enter the Senations, Rome's version of man versus wild, if the wild. Was extremely annoyed, and the man was wearing gladiator sandals. These were staged hunts where specially trained fighters, called fenatores, or, let's be honest, whoever, was available and didn't owe too many favors, were given weapons and told, try not to look nervous. The Colosseum would be transformed into a faux wilderness. Fake trees, imported sand, maybe even a bit of shrubbery if someone had the budget. Then, wild animals were released. Leopards, bears, ostriches, rhinos, crocodiles, basically anything that could stomp, charge, or deeply confuse an audience. Fighters were expected to battle them with spears, nets, or in some cases, absolutely nothing helpful. There are stories of men sent in with slings or sticks, which is exactly as effective as yelling, "Please stop," at a charging boar. And here's the twist. It still wasn't a fair fight, just in the opposite direction. Sometimes the animals were sick, drugged, or starved to make things manageable. Other times they were just dumped into chaos, unsure if they were supposed to attack or audition for a tragedy. Not that it mattered. The goal wasn't survival. It was spectacle. Did the crowd care about the animals? Not especially. If a rhino managed to flip a man into the air like a decorative coin, they cheered. If the man somehow won, they cheered louder. There was no losing, just entertainment. And occasionally, the animals teamed up. In one account, a bear and a lion supposedly ignored the humans and started fighting each other. The crowd adored it. The organizer probably got a promotion. It wasn't hunting. It wasn't combat. It was what happens when an empire gets rich enough to invent new hobbies and bored enough to turn the food chain into improv theater. The sheer scale of these hunts was staggering. During the inaugural games of the Colosseum, some 9,000 animals were killed. By now, the Roman Colosseum had established a theme. Take something brutal and somehow make it weirder. But when they wanted to and really impress the audience, they dipped into mythology. Because why simply execute someone when you could recreate a legend while doing it? This delightful tradition was known as fatal charades. Not a game, unfortunately, but a form of public execution that merged storytelling with creative sentencing. Picture a condemned man dressed as Icarus, strapped into fake wings and pushed off a platform. No, he didn't fly. No, it wasn't subtle. The Romans loved mythology, gods, heroes, tragic endings. So instead of quietly dealing with criminals, they reimagined their deaths as performances. The audience wasn't just watching justice, they were watching art. Violent, state-funded art. Take the story of Prometheus, for instance. In myth, he's chained to a rock and has a certain recurring eagle problem. In the Colosseum, they skipped the rock and used stage props. But the eagle? That part was real. Or Orpheus, the tragic musician who tried to rescue his wife from the underworld. The Roman version, a man in a tunic with a harp walks across the arena, and then someone quietly releases a few large, extremely uninterested animals. It didn't end with music. The crowd, of course, loved it. Finally, culture and entertainment all in one. You could feel refined for recognizing the myth and still point and laugh when the guy in the Apollo wig tripped over his sandals. Were these performances accurate to the original stories? Not remotely. But accuracy wasn't the goal. Spectacle was. If they remembered the plot correctly, great. If not, they just invented a new version where Hercules loses a foot. To be clear, these weren't plays. The performers weren't actors. They were people who'd been sentenced to death and were now expected to help bring a story to life before exiting it in the final act. No curtain call, no applause. Just a well-timed nod from the emperor and a satisfied crowd who now felt a little more cultured, despite the fact that someone had just been Zeused off a scaffold. It was a grim reminder that in Rome, even your death could be turned into a piece of political theater. Just when you think the Colosseum couldn't get more extra, Rome said, "What if we made it a lake?" Yes, at various points in its early history, the Colosseum hosted mock naval battles called naumachiae. Because when you've already turned executions into theater, the next logical step is to simulate a maritime war in a building that is very much not near the sea. Roman engineers, who clearly had both talent and too much time, figured out how to flood the arena floor. Not with symbolism, with actual water, the kind that makes boats float and inexperienced sailors panic. The plan was simple: fill the floor, toss in a few ships, and stage a battle, with real people who were often less informed about rowing than the audience. Sometimes these mock battles reenacted famous sea clashes, like the battle between the Athenians and the Syracusans. Other times, it was just teams of captives told, row, fight, and try not to look like you've never seen an oar before. And let's talk about those boats. They were smaller than real warships, of course. You try fitting a full fleet into an amphitheater and see how far you get. But they were still decked out with paint, flags, and very real weapons, which meant there was a good chance that someone was going to fall in or be pushed in or just jump in because it seemed like the better option. The audience watched from above like cruise passengers watching a buffet fire, equal parts confused and delighted. Nobody really cared about naval tactics. They wanted to see if someone fell off the boat in a dramatic way. Bonus points if they screamed something poetic while doing it. And yes, there were moments of drama. Ships colliding, fighters leaping across decks, people accidentally poking their allies with spears. Honestly, it was less naval strategy and more floaty chaos with costumes. Eventually, the Colosseum stopped flooding itself for these shows, likely because the construction of the Hypogeum, the elaborate underground tunnels, made it impossible. But for a while, Romans got their sea battles, their splashing, and their laughs. Even if half the participants couldn't swim and the other half couldn't steer. Sometimes even staged combat wasn't dramatic enough. That's when the organizers rolled out the party pack: blindfolds, shackles, mismatched weapons, and a general disregard for the laws of physics or common decency. Why? Because fairness is boring. But watching someone try to fight blindfolded, hilarious for everyone except the person wearing the blindfold. One popular twist was to take a perfectly competent fighter and make their life significantly harder for entertainment's sake. Remove their armor, shorten their weapon, or give them something completely useless, like a net or, worse, a wooden sword. Nothing says good luck quite like stepping into the arena holding what is essentially a stick from a child's toy set. The practice weapons used in training, which were often made of wood, were deliberately heavier than the real ones to build stamina, but in a real match, a wooden sword was a death sentence. Then there were the shackles. Fighters were sometimes chained by the ankles, wrists, or both, because clearly, if you've already trained to survive an armed duel in front of thousands, what you really need is to be physically restrained while doing it. Bonus, it makes dodging a lot more interpretive. Some were forced to fight while tied together. Yes, to each other. It was called the three-legged race of doom. Okay, not officially, but it should have been. Imagine trying to survive with someone else's panic dictating your footwork. One stumbles, both fall, and the crowd loses its mind. Of course, these gimmicks weren't used on just anyone. Gladiators were investments. The ones who drew crowds and had reputations were spared the most ridiculous setups, unless the audience was bored and the emperor wanted a laugh. Then all bets were off. And let's not forget the occasional surprise opponent. You think you're fighting one guy, and suddenly a trapdoor opens and out comes a second one. Or even better, something with claws. Imagine a WWE match where the floor randomly spits out a bear. Ancient Rome did that, but sincerely. None of this was in the rulebook, mostly because there was no rulebook, just a checklist. Is it entertaining? Is it absurd? Can it be cleaned up before the next match? You might assume that the Roman Colosseum, in all its chaotic brilliance, gave its audience a break between events, a moment to stretch, grab some olives, maybe talk about how well the gladiators were accessorized. And technically, yes, there was an intermission. But in true Roman fashion, even that was turned into a performance. Welcome to the Meridiani, the midday break. While the morning had beast hunts and the afternoon promised gladiator duels, lunchtime was reserved for something a little more procedural, public executions. Because nothing pairs with your midday bread roll quite like the empire's idea of due process. These executions weren't spontaneous. They were scheduled, organized, timed with the precision of a stage play. The condemned, usually criminals, deserters, or people who had annoyed the wrong bureaucrat, were brought out for the crowd to see justice being served, loudly and without any red tape. No one was expecting drama. This wasn't a fight, it was a warning. Don't be like this guy, the Empire said. Also, please enjoy your olives. And the methods, well, let's just say they were creative. Sometimes it was quick, a clean finish, and on with the show. Other times, it was needlessly elaborate, especially if the person had made headlines. The Romans believed justice should be efficient, theatrical, and ideally sponsored by someone in a toga. The crowd, by this point, was used to it. Kids asked for better seats. Merchants hawked snacks. No one blinked. If anything, they got annoyed when it ran long. "Come on," someone would mutter. "We're just here for the real matches." That's what makes this part so absurd. For the audience, executions were just filler content, like commercials only. Instead of advertising soap, they demonstrated why you shouldn't steal one. And if that feels unsettling, that's kind of the point. The Colosseum wasn't just an arena, It was a carefully choreographed showcase of control. Every moment, including intermission, was designed to remind the public who had power and what happened when you challenged it. In modern sports, referees make the calls. In the Roman Colosseum, the final verdict came from thousands of sweaty spectators who had eaten too much bread and were possibly 2 goblets deep into wine. Yes, in Rome, justice was crowdsourced. After a gladiator match, the loser didn't always die immediately. If he fought well, or at least flailed with enthusiasm, the final decision rested with the audience. Would he live to fight another day, or become a cautionary tale for future footwork? Enter the thumbs. You've probably heard of the famous thumbs down meaning death. Except, plot twist, historians still argue whether thumbs up or thumbs down meant death. Some sources suggest that thumbs up symbolized a drawn sword and meant execution, while a hidden, or pressed down thumb, pollis compresso, signified a sheathed weapon and meant mercy. The popular image of a downward thumb for death largely comes from a 19th century painting, not from clear historical accounts. Either way, the audience's reaction mattered, and they were not shy. They came to the Colosseum ready to cheer, boo, and yell unsolicited opinions at people literally fighting for their lives. It was ancient Yelp, only with more tunics and fewer stars. If a fighter was boring, he might get silence, the worst possible outcome. If he was exciting, the crowd roared for mercy or punishment, or both. It was a little unclear, honestly, but very loud. Some gladiators courted favor. They played to the stands. They had fans. Yes, actual fan bases. Certain fighters were known by name, and some even had merchandise. Okay, not official merchandise, but people wore carvings of them. Same idea. And if the emperor was present, oh, it got political fast. He could override the crowd's vote, granting mercy or insisting on execution. Either way, he was reading the room like a stand-up comic, but with higher stakes and fewer jokes. Well, depending on the emperor. So, while the games looked like chaos, they were weirdly democratic, at least for the fighters. If you entertained, you had a shot. If you didn't, well, the crowd was ready to vote with their voices, their hands, and occasionally their sandwiches. Because in the Colosseum, survival wasn't just about skill. It was about giving the people a good show and hoping they were in a generous mood. Of all the creatures you might expect to face in the Roman Colosseum, lions, tigers, that one guy with a net, the humble wild boar, probably wouldn't top your list. But in ancient Rome, pigs weren't just food. They were part of the entertainment, and not in a cute farm petting zoo kind of way. Wild boars were no joke. These were muscular, tusk-wielding, forest-born battering rams with hooves. Think of them as nature's angry bowling balls, with less mercy and more momentum. Now imagine one of them charging at you in front of a cheering crowd while you try to look heroic in a leather skirt. Gladiators were trained for many things, but pig strategy was not high on the curriculum. Sometimes boars were used in animal hunts for nations, released into the arena for fighters to take down with spears. Other times, in an effort to keep things spicy, the boars were introduced mid-combat as surprise guests. Nothing livened up a duel like a 300-pound pig sprinting across the stage uninvited. In at least one event, records describe an animal so aggressive that it charged, threw props, ignored its handler, and nearly ran into the front row. The Romans loved it. Nothing says great public funding like airborne pork. And if you're wondering how this counts as entertainment to the Roman crowd, unpredictability was the point. A lion was majestic. A tiger was terrifying. But a boar, that was hilarious, especially when someone underestimated it. Even emperors got in on the action. Some hosted themed hunts showcasing their exotic animal collections, including particularly fierce pigs, just to prove how well stocked their empire was in both bacon and bravado. The fighters, meanwhile, were mostly just trying to survive. You could train to counter a sword. You could anticipate a human, but a wild boar, that was pure chaos in pig form, with tusks that turned kneecaps into hazards. And in the grand tradition of Roman entertainment, no one asked the important question, should we be doing this? They just asked, can we fit another boar into this scene? Spoiler, they could, and they often did. The arena floor was no ordinary stretch of sand. Beneath it lay a labyrinth of tunnels, cages, lifts and pulleys, all carefully designed to ruin someone's afternoon. These mechanical marvels, part of the hypogeum, allowed stagehands to raise animals, props, or sometimes entire set pieces into the arena with unsettling theatrical timing. You're a gladiator mid-fight, sweating under the Roman sun, and just as you're about to win, a boom! The floor opens and out comes a leopard. Not part of the match, just bonus content. This was not accidental. Roman event planners, yes, that was essentially a real job, loved surprises. Why have a normal duel when you could turn it into an obstacle course with hidden lions? And it wasn't just animals. Sometimes chariots would roll out, sometimes fire pits, sometimes large wooden constructs, meant to represent mythological backdrops like the underworld or a poorly made volcano. All of it designed to keep the crowd engaged and the participants deeply confused. It turned combat into theater and theater into absolute chaos. You didn't just fight your opponent. You fought the floor, the props, and your growing suspicion that someone behind the scenes was laughing very hard. These trapdoors were operated by teams of slaves and workers beneath the stage, coordinating, timing with the precision of a military operation, or at least a mildly chaotic circus. One wrong lever, and suddenly a bear appeared in the wrong scene, or worse, didn't appear at all, leaving two fighters awkwardly circling each other for 20 minutes. To the audience, it was thrilling. To the combatants, it was a lesson in humility and ankle awareness. Because in the Colosseum, you weren't just facing opponents, you were facing architecture, stage, design, and the Roman Empire's deep commitment to surprising people with unpleasant things. If the gods truly favored the brave, then surely they also appreciated the ones who managed not to fall through a trapdoor mid-victory pose. At first glance, gladiator versus gladiator matches sound like the fairest part of the Colosseum schedule. Two trained professionals, well matched, facing off in front of a roaring crowd like ancient UFC but with better outfits. But of course, this is Rome, and fairness, as always, was optional. While some bouts were evenly matched for dramatic tension and crowd investment, many others were rigged faster than a politician's hurry to election campaign. One fighter might be a seasoned veteran with years of arena experience, the other a terrified rookie who just figured out which end of the sword was the business end. And don't get too attached to the idea of standard weapons either. Sometimes one fighter got a gladius, and a shield, the other a net and a trident. Not because it made tactical sense, but because the crowd liked variety, and someone in event planning had a flair for chaos. These odd pairings had names. The Secutor versus the Budoretiarius trident guy was especially popular. One had armor, a big helmet, and traditional gear. The other wore almost nothing, carried a glorified fish fork, and relied on dodging for dear life. It was less a battle of equals and more can Speedy Mick bare feet avoid being flattened. Why the mismatches? Because Rome loved contrast. The sight of two identically armed fighters was boring, but throw a bulky armored tank against a wiry, nearly naked rope flinger. Now that's entertainment. And if one gladiator had a growing fan base or a sponsor to impress, the match might be tilted in his favor, not so he could prove himself, but so he could look even cooler while winning. Gladiators weren't just fighters, they were investments, walking brand names. If someone had a dramatic win streak or a distinctive fighting style, the empire leaned in. Fans bought figurines. Children reenacted their victories. Merchandising wasn't official, but it existed. So yes, sometimes they were handed an easy victory just to keep the legend alive. The losing fighter, well, he was either forgettable or unlucky, possibly both, because in the Colosseum, balance was an illusion. The audience didn't come for sportsmanship. They came to see someone outmatched and hopefully outmaneuvered. And if that person somehow won anyway, now that was a story. If you thought the Roman Colosseum was just about swords and sand, think again. It was also about spin, and not the kind that happens when someone gets hit too hard and falls in a dramatic spiral. No, this was politics. The Colosseum wasn't just a place to entertain the masses, it was a PR machine custom built to remind everyone exactly who was in charge. Every event, every match, every oops, we released two tigers moment was part of a carefully curated imperial message: obey, or else. Executions weren't just punishments, they were statements. Traitors, rebels, or just people who annoyed powerful senators were dispatched, publicly and theatrically, often with backstory and staging. One day, you're writing a scroll with a bad opinion. The next day, you're playing fallen hero number 2 in a reenactment of a myth you didn't ask to be part of. And the emperor, he wasn't just watching, he was starring. He sat in the best seat, naturally, dead center, plenty of shade, and just close enough to the action to nod thoughtfully when someone was decapitated artistically. The crowd watched him as much as the fights. His reactions mattered. If he gave a thumbs up, it wasn't just a gesture, it was a headline. Some emperors used the games to build favor. Bread and circuses, remember? Keep the people fed and distracted, and they won't notice the empire's budget falling apart. Others used it to intimidate. A public execution here, a surprise lion there, all very motivating. And if you were lucky enough to be a popular gladiator, you could even be used politically. Fight well, and you were proof of Rome's strength. Refuse to die properly, and suddenly you were a liability. Sometimes entire events were staged around political narratives. Celebrating a military victory. Great, let's reenact it in the arena with extras and actual casualties. Hosting a foreign dignitary? Let's show them a good time with tigers. Nothing impresses a visiting official like a guy in armor jumping over a hippo. So yes, the Colosseum was Rome's most violent press conference. Every splash of sand and dramatic collapse was part of the empire's broader messaging strategy. Rome is strong. Rome is glorious. And Rome is definitely watching. With all the mismatches, trapdoors, weaponized pigs, and political overtones, why did the Colosseum stay open for so long? Simple. Rome was addicted to spectacle. These weren't just shows, they were cultural events, political tools, social glue, and occasionally, legally questionable therapy for a civilization that desperately needed hobbies. The empire was big, complicated, and frequently on fire, sometimes literally. But give the people a gladiator match, and suddenly everything felt stable. The formula worked. A bored, overtaxed citizen might complain about grain shortages, but toss them a seat in the Colosseum, a snack, and a front-row view of someone wrestling a panther in a wig, and suddenly, life wasn't so bad. That's Empire Building 101. Distract, dazzle, repeat. And emperors loved it. The games gave them instant approval ratings. Want to win the crowd after raising taxes? Host a week-long festival. Accidentally insulted the Senate? Release some flaming chariots and tigers. Want to make a general feel insecure? Have his enemy play the hero in a restaged myth and forget to tell him it's a metaphor. The Colosseum was the original social media feed, constant updates, constant drama, a place where careers were made, enemies were erased, and your public image could be defined by a single thumb gesture. No comments section though, just roaring applause or complete silence, which in Rome was basically a downvote. But even the greatest empires get tired. Over time, the shows became less extravagant, the animals harder to import, the audience less dazzled. By the time Rome began to crumble, even the Colosseum started to feel like yesterday's news. Sand and stone don't last forever, and neither do attention spans. The last gladiatorial combat was recorded in the 5th century AD, and the animal hunts ceased in the 6th century. Still, the legacy lingered. Even today, we remember the Colosseum not as a sports arena, but as a monument to how far a society will go for a good show. It wasn't fair, it wasn't kind, but it was unforgettable. Because when you build a stage for 50,000 people and fill it with fire, iron, and politics, well, you're not aiming for subtlety. You're aiming for history. Hashtag Section 2. You trudge through the damp green hills of ancient Ireland. It's the last night of April, and the air, thick with the smell of wet, earth, and blooming hawthorn, carries a different kind of energy tonight. A low hum of anticipation seems to rise from the very soil. You look out over the rolling landscape, dotted with stone circles and whispering trees, and you see the first flicker of a distant flame against the deepening twilight. Then another, and another. It's Beltane, the ancient Celtic fire festival, a night when the veil between worlds is thin, and the community gathers not just to celebrate the coming of summer, but to survive it. While your distant descendants might one day mark the season with sunscreen and complaints about the heat, your world operates on a different rhythm. You and your kin are busy stacking wood, not for a casual barbecue, but for 2 roaring bonfires that will soon blaze like twin suns in the darkness. Why 2? Because you're about to herd your most valuable possessions, your cattle, your sheep, your entire livelihood, directly between them. It sounds like a recipe for disaster, but in this world, it's the best insurance policy you can get. The smoke, you believe, is a purifier, a cleanser that will ward off disease, blight, and any lingering bad luck from the long, dark winter. Fire here isn't just a tool for warmth or cooking. It's a living force, a mediator between the mortal realm and the other world, the home of the Sea, the fey folk who can either bless your crops or blight them with a passing whim. Lighting the Beltane fires isn't a casual act, it's a sacred duty. The druids, the spiritual MVPs of your community, are in charge. They stand cloaked and solemn, their faces illuminated by the growing flames. They chant in a language that feels older than the hills, their hands gesturing dramatically towards the heavens. Eventually, they summon the central bonfire, the Tain Egan or Need fire, kindled not from an existing flame but from friction, from the raw, primal act of wood rubbing against wood. From this one sacred spark, every household hearth in the region, which had been extinguished earlier in the day, will be relit. It's a spiritual reset button for the entire community, but with way more sparks and a distinct lack of user manuals. As the twin fires crackle and roar, casting dancing shadows that make the familiar landscape seem alien and alive, the procession begins. You and your neighbors, your faces a mixture of reverence and anxiety, lead your livestock forward. The cows moo nervously, their eyes wide in the flickering light, but you guide them steadily through the smoky corridor between the blazes. You feel the intense heat on your skin, smell the singed hair of the animal in front of you, and you whisper a prayer that this ritual will keep your herd healthy and productive for the season to come. Remember that time your neighbor's best cow went lame just before the summer pastures opened? He skipped the fires last year. You're not making that mistake. Once the animals are safely through, it's the people's turn. The air is thick with the scent of burning herbs, juniper, rowan, and other plants believed to have protective properties. Young men and women, their faces flushed with excitement and mead, take. Daring leaps over the smaller flames at the edge of the bonfire. It's a test of courage, a bid for fertility, and a bit of a social spectacle. Nothing says romance quite like mild singeing. Couples might jump the flames together, their hands clasped, believing the act will bind their love for the coming year. Solo dancers, their movements wild and uninhibited, hope to catch the eye of a potential partner, or perhaps stir some divine matchmaking from the spirits watching from the shadows. Historians still argue whether these dances were always clothed or if, in the spirit of unbridled fertility, they sometimes took a more natural form. Beltane is more than just a party. It's a ritual of seasonal transformation, a fiery handshake between mortals and the powerful unseen forces that govern their world. As the night wears on and the great fires begin to die down, you and the others will carefully gather the glowing embers. These aren't just leftover coals, they are concentrated blessings. You'll carry them home to relight your hearth, ensuring your home is protected for another year. The rest will be scattered in the fields, spreading the potent magic of the Beltane flame across the land, a down payment on a bountiful harvest. You walk home under a sky full of stars, the smell of smoke clinging to your clothes, feeling a sense of renewal, of having passed through a gateway into the light and warmth of summer. Now, let's leave the damp green hills of the Celtic lands and journey eastward. across continents and climates, to the arid, sun-blasted heart of ancient Persia. Here, fire isn't something you dance around while hoping your sheep stay healthy. Here, fire is a divine presence, a sacred entity that must be fed, revered, and absolutely, under no circumstances, be sneezed on. Welcome to the world of Zoroastrianism, one of the world's oldest monotheistic religions, where fire isn't just a symbol of God, it's the living embodiment of truth, order, and purity itself. You are a priest, a magus, and your life is dedicated to tending the sacred flame. In your temple, the Atatash Berum, or fire of victory, a flame has been burning continuously for centuries. It's not just a fire, it's Atorrent, the son of Ahura Mazda, the one true God. It is a living, breathing representative of Atasha, the divine order and truth that holds the cosmos together. Letting it go out isn't just an inconvenience, it's a cosmic offense, a tear in the fabric of reality. So, no pressure. Your daily routine is a meticulous ritual. You approach the fire altar wearing a padan, a white cloth that covers your mouth and nose, lest your impure breath contaminate the sacred flame. You are armed not with a fire extinguisher, but with a bundle of consecrated sandalwood and a pair of silver tongs. You feed the fire several times a day, offering fragrant wood and reciting ancient Avestan prayers. You gently fan the flames, not to make them bigger, but to keep them clean and bright. You are part divine janitor, part spiritual guardian, robed in white and tasked with keeping a piece of heaven alive on earth. These fire rituals aren't confined to the quiet sanctity of the temple. During major festivals like Nowruz, the New Year, or Chahashanbe Suri, the Red Wednesday just before it, the entire community participates. You see bonfires lit in public squares, their flames leaping into the night sky. People from all walks of life gather, their faces glowing with a mixture of joy and reverence. They leap over the fires, not with the wild abandon of the Celts, but with a specific, chanted plea, "Give me your beautiful red color, and take back my sickly pallor." It's the ancient Persian version of New Year, New Me, a ritual of purification where you symbolically trade your winter-worn weariness for the vibrant energy of the flame. The sparks that fly from these bonfires aren't just metaphorical. The fire is a messenger, carrying prayers to the heavens while simultaneously warding off lurking demons and any bad luck that might have been hiding under your rug. Even your approach to death is dictated by the purity of fire. You would never cremate a body. To do so would be to pollute the sacred element with decaying flesh, a truly horrific defilement. Instead, the dead are laid to rest in high circular structures called towers of silence, where their bodies are consumed by vultures, returning to nature without contaminating the earth, water, or fire. It's a quirky tidbit of the faith that highlights its profound reverence for the elements. In your Persian worldview, fire isn't something to be tamed or controlled. It is a sacred thread connecting humanity to the divine blueprint of the cosmos. It is a warm, flickering flame, yes, but it is also a blazing, unwavering reminder to keep your soul, your thoughts, and your kindling in good and righteous order. You watch the eternal flame in your temple, its light pushing back the shadows, and you feel a sense of profound peace. You are not just watching a fire, You are gazing into the face of truth itself. Now, let's jog, quite literally, westward into ancient Greece, where fire festivals aren't just solemn holy ceremonies. They are full-on athletic competitions. Because when you're a Greek, you don't just pray to the gods, you sprint for them, preferably while carrying something flammable. You are a young Athenian athlete, your muscles taut, your breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Tonight is the lampadidromia, the torch race, and the honor of your tribe is resting on your shoulders. This isn't just a race, it's a sacred relay where runners pass a lit torch like a flaming baton through the darkened streets of Athens. The goal isn't just speed, though speed is crucial. The primary objective is to keep the flame alive. If you drop your torch, if you stumble and the flame sputters out, you are disqualified. You have failed your city, your tribe, and the very gods you are trying to honor. These races are held in honor of deities associated with fire, craft, and knowledge. Hephaestus, the lame god of the forge who crafts lightning bolts for Zeus. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and strategy. And, most importantly, Prometheus, the rebellious titan who famously stole fire from Olympus and gifted it to humanity. That bold move, as you well know from the stories, earned him an eternity of having his liver pecked out by an eagle, which in the grand scheme of Greek mythology counts as a light slap on the wrist. The torch race is ritual theatre. As you run, the flickering flame casting long dancing shadows on the marble columns of temples and the faces of the cheering crowd, you are not just an athlete, you are a symbol. By keeping the flame burning, you represent the endurance of divine wisdom, the spark of civilization passed down from the gods to mortals. It's not enough to possess the fire, you have to prove you can carry it, protect it, and pass it on without fumbling like a butter-fingered apprentice in Hephaestus's workshop. This is no casual jog through the olive groves. The races are often held at night, the only light coming from the flaming torches bouncing through the darkness. The visual impact is intentional. The gods are watching, and you had better make it look epic. The air is electric with the shouts of the crowd and the pounding of feet on stone. You receive the torch from your teammate, the heat scorching your hand, and you sprint, your lungs burning, your focus narrowed to a single point, the flame. Don't let it go out. There are deeper symbolic layers here. Prometheus's gift of fire wasn't just about warmth or cooking fuel. It represented intellect, creativity, technology, and rebellion. In honoring him with these torch races, you and your fellow Greeks aren't just reenacting a myth. You are subtly celebrating your own clever defiance, your relentless pursuit of knowledge and civilization, even if it came at a divine cost. You pass the torch to the next runner in your team, your part in the sacred chain complete. If your team wins, you'll receive a crown of leaves, perhaps a small statue, or even a jar of fine olive oil, because this is Greece after all. But the real prize is glory, Tinkleos, the undying fame that comes from honoring the gods with your strength and discipline. As you watch the final runner cross the finish line, the flame still burning brightly, you know that this tradition is a flickering echo of your culture's reverence for stolen fire, cosmic rebellion, and the timeless art of running really, really fast while trying not to set your own eyebrows on fire. The modern Olympic torch relay is a direct descendant of this very ritual. a mainstream historical fact that connects our world to yours. From the competitive spirit of Greek torch relays, we now turn eastward, again to the vibrant spiritual landscape of ancient India. Here, fire isn't stolen from the gods. Fire, a god. You are a Brahmin priest, and you are preparing for a yajna, a sacred fire ritual. Your focus is on Agni, the Hindu god of fire, who is not just a deity of warmth and light, but a cosmic postman, a divine messenger. His sacred duty is to carry offerings from the mortal world on earth up to the heavens, delivering them directly to the other gods with perfect reliability. No lost packages, no customer service lines, just pure fiery efficiency. In the Vedic rituals that form the bedrock of Hinduism, Agni is the essential bridge between humans and the divine. Any prayer worth its salt, any offering of significance, requires his presence. And you can't just use any old fire. It must be kindled in a specific, sacred manner, fed with offerings of ghee, clarified butter, the holy nectar of every ritual, and accompanied by the chanting of powerful Sanskrit mantras. These yajnas are so complex and important that priests like you devote their entire lives to mastering them. It's a form of spiritual pyromania, but with a lot more incense and far fewer insurance claims. For today's ceremony, you are seated before a Havan Kund, a sacred fire pit constructed in an intricate geometric pattern, its shape and dimensions aligned with cosmic forces. You will not use a matchstick or a flint. Instead, you will coax the fire into life using an anarani, a wooden drill that you rotate rapidly in a block of wood, an act of friction that generates the first spark. As the kindling catches and the flames begin to rise, you know that Agni has become present. You are no longer just watching a fire, you are making eye contact with a god. The ritual begins in earnest. You and the other priests chant the ancient hymns, your voices rising and falling in a hypnotic rhythm that has been passed down for thousands of years. With each verse, you make an offering to the fire. Grains, herbs, and spoonfuls of golden ghee are poured into the flames, which leap and crackle in response. Each offering is for a different deity: Indra for strength, Saraswati for knowledge, Lakshmi for prosperity. But it is Agni who consumes them all and carries their essence to the intended recipients. The smoke that rises is not just smoke, it is the physical manifestation of your prayers, a fragrant column connecting earth and heaven. This devotion to fire isn't a one-time thing. The most devout households in your community maintain an eternal flame, a fire that is never allowed to go out, passed down from generation to generation. If such a fire were to die, it wouldn't just be an inconvenience, it would be a spiritual emergency, a disruption of the cosmic order. Imagine being the person who accidentally spilled a bucket of water on a divine flame that had been burning since your great-great-grandfather's time. Oops doesn't quite cover it. Later, these profound Vedic beliefs will evolve and find expression in popular fire festivals like Holi, Lohri, and Diwali. During these celebrations, entire communities will gather around bonfires, singing, dancing, and making offerings. It is joy wrapped in smoke, purification dancing in sparks. Unlike some traditions where fire is a terrifying force to be kept at arm's length, here it is intimate, living, and profoundly respected. Agni is not feared like a destructive wildfire, he is honored like a beloved ancestor. a divine witness to every vow, every birth, every marriage, and every passing soul. He is the mouth of the gods and the heart of your spiritual world. Now, let's drift down the river of time to ancient Egypt, where fire is seen as the very breath of the sun god himself. You are standing on the banks of the Nile, the air hot and heavy. The sun, a perfect golden disk in a sea of blue, is not just a star, it is Ra, the king of the gods, sailing across the sky in his blazing solar bark. Every day he brings light and life to the world, and every night he journeys into the underworld, the Duat, to battle Apep, the serpent of chaos, his path lit entirely by his own radiant celestial fire. No pressure, Ra. While Ra handles the cosmic commute, you and your fellow Egyptians celebrate with fire on a more human scale. Here, fire is less about providing warmth, the Egyptian sun takes care of that, and more about purification, protection, and rebirth. The grand temples at Karnak and Luxor are not just stone structures. They are architectural instruments designed to capture the first rays of the morning sun, channeling the light into their darkest inner sanctums as if the gods themselves were turning on the lights. You are a priest preparing for the Feast of Opet, a massive festival celebrating the rejuvenation of the gods and the pharaoh. This isn't your average New Year's countdown. It's a multi-day spectacle involving grand processions, mountains of incense, and, most importantly, ceremonial torches. You carry one of these torches, its flame a tiny echo of Ra's solar fire. As you walk in a procession that winds from one temple to another, the fire you carry represents Ra's life-giving energy returning to Earth, warding off darkness, disease, and the forces of chaos. It's spiritual pest control, but with sacred pyrotechnics and a much better soundtrack. Even in your funerary practices, fire plays a crucial but carefully managed role. You would never cremate a body. That's a bit too final for a culture obsessed with preserving the physical form for the afterlife. But you do burn copious amounts of incense and sacred oils during the mummification and burial rites. The fragrant smoke that rises from the offerings is believed to carry the deceased soul, their bambi, upward, helping it on its journey to the Hall of Judgment. And if the pleasant scent happens to please the gods, all the better. Within the temples, especially those dedicated to Ra or his fiery lion-headed daughter, Sekhmet, priests maintain eternal flames. Sekhmet is a goddess you would really don't want to upset. She is the goddess of both destruction and healing, a divine paradox. Her festivals often involve fire rituals meant to appease her destructive nature and channel her power for protection. These sometimes include the ritual drinking of beer dyed red with pomegranate juice to look like blood, a callback to the myth where she almost destroyed humanity until she was tricked into getting drunk. Egyptian gods, you've noticed, have a flair for theatrical drama and appreciate a good drink. In your world, fire is not chaotic or wild. It is orderly, celestial, and radiant. It comes with scrolls, hymns, and complex schedules. Every spark has a script, every flame a purpose, all reflecting the divine order, or Ma'at, that governs the universe. Fire is the light of the gods made manifest, a force to be respected, managed, and revered as a fundamental part of the cosmic machine. Now we descend into the dense jungles and wind-swept highlands of ancient Mesoamerica, where fire doesn't just symbolize life, it is the very engine of the cosmos. And keeping that engine running requires a bit more than candles and kind thoughts. You are an Aztec citizen in the great city of Tenochtitlan, and the end of a 52-year cycle is approaching. A palpable sense of dread hangs over the city, thicker than the smoke from the cooking fires that will soon be extinguished. Among the Aztecs, as well as the Maya and Zapotec before them, fire is a sacred force that governs time, agriculture, and human fate. But they don't mess around with mere seasonal festivals. They have calendrical fire resets, and the most important of these is the new fire ceremony, the toxumulpilia, or binding of the years. It is held only once every 52 years, when the 260-day ritual calendar and the 365-day solar calendar align. It's a kind of cosmic Y2K, but with much higher stakes and a distinct lack of IT professionals. As the dreaded date approaches, a wave of ritualistic cleansing sweeps across the empire. You and your family extinguish your household hearth, a fire that has been burning continuously for years. All fires across the land are put out. The world is plunged into darkness. You break your pottery, you destroy your old clothes, you fast and you pray. Pregnant women are hidden away, and children are kept awake, for it is believed that if the world ends, they will be the first to be turned into mice. Everyone waits in silent, terrified anticipation, assuming the world might actually end. The Tzitzimime, the star demons of darkness, are waiting at the edges of the sky, ready to descend and devour humanity if the sun fails to rise. At the stroke of midnight, on the summit of the Hill of the Star, a sacred mountain, near the capital, the high priests perform the ceremony's terrifying climax. A high-ranking captive is sacrificed, his heart removed. In the empty chest cavity of the victim, the priests place a wooden fire drill and begin to work frantically. The entire fate of the universe hangs on this single act. Will a spark catch? Will the new fire be born? You wait in the darkness, your own heart pounding in your chest. Then a cry goes up from the watchers. A tiny flicker is seen on the distant hilltop. The fire has been kindled. A massive bonfire is lit from this new sacred flame, its light visible. For miles around, a beacon of hope against the oppressive darkness. The world is not ending. The sun will rise again. A wave of relief washes over you. Runners light their torches from the great bonfire and race back to the cities and towns, carrying the new fire to every temple and every home. You receive the flame at your own hearth, and as the fire springs to life, you feel a profound sense of renewal. The cosmos has been reset, the contract with the gods renewed for another 52 years. This reverence for fire is not unique to the Aztecs. In the Maya civilization, fire plays a key role in temple dedications and royal rituals. When a new temple is built, it must be awakened with fire. Priests burn offerings of copal incense, rubber, and sometimes blood in the central chamber to activate the structure, as if inviting the divine tenants to move in. If you are a king, your accession to the throne requires elaborate fire rites to legitimize your rule and connect you to the gods. The Zapotecs of Monte Alban are just as committed. Their primary deity is often depicted as a fire god, Cochillo, who is also associated with lightning and storms. Festivals in his honor include bonfires, ritual dances, and occasionally the dramatic burning of symbolic effigies. a kind of divine piñata with a flammable personality. Across all these cultures, fire is a dialogue with the gods, but it is also a demand. The fire is hungry, and it needs to be fed, not just with logs or fragrant, copal resin, but with the most precious substance of all, life. The smoke doesn't just rise, it speaks, carrying the pleas and promises of humanity to a pantheon of powerful and often terrifying gods. Now let's sail across the vast blue expanse of the Pacific Ocean, where volcanic islands dot the water like stepping stones of fire. For the ancient Polynesians, fire isn't just a necessity for survival, it is an origin story, a divine inheritance passed down from gods who live inside the very mountains that form their world. You are a native Hawaiian living on the slopes of a great volcano. At the heart of your fire beliefs stands the goddess Pele, the tempestuous, beautiful, and terrifying spirit of volcanoes. She is particularly revered here, on the Big Island, where she is said to reside in the Halema Uma crater at the summit of Kilauea, one of the most active volcanoes in the world. Pele is not a calm, gentle hearth goddess tending your cooking pot. She is a blazing, creative, and destructive force of nature who creates new land with her, rivers of molten lava, and then, in a fit of divine rage, can destroy what she has built. Respecting fire in your culture isn't optional, it's a fundamental rule of survival. When the volcano rumbles and the sky turns red with its glow, you know it is not a random geological event. It is Pele expressing herself. The fiery lava flows, which you call Awhaiʻeʻe and Ahoho, are seen as her fiery footsteps, reshaping the land according to her divine will. You don't run in terror, at least not at first. You watch with reverence. You leave offerings, or oko okupu, near the edge of the lava flows. Flowers, food, chants, and sometimes even strands of your own hair. When a goddess is literally remaking the geography of your world, it pays to stay on her good side. Fire festivals in Polynesia take many forms, but one of the most mesmerizing is the Siva Afi, the fire knife dance, which is still performed today in places like Samoa, Tonga, and Hawaii. You watch as a warrior, his body glistening with sweat in the firelight, begins to dance. He is not just dancing, he is spinning, leaping and flipping with flaming knives, their blades wrapped in burning cloth. The dance, originally part of warrior rituals, is more than just showmanship. It is a spiritual display, a demonstration of courage, strength, and control. The fire knife is seen as an extension of the warrior's amana, his inner power, a dance with the spirits of his ancestors. In your everyday life, you use fire with a deep sense of respect. You cook your food in an otaimu, an underground oven where hot volcanic rocks steam the food, a gentle and efficient use of fire's power. You use torches made from kukui nuts to light your way during ceremonies. Their flames a connection to the spirit world. You believe that ancestral spirits, the Iomakua, can travel on the flames, their presence visible in the flickering of a torch or the glow of a firefly. Even your funeral rites involve sacred torches and chants, guiding the soul of the deceased on its journey to the ancestral realms across the sea. To ignore or mishandle fire, to be careless with it, to disrespect it, is to risk offending not only the powerful goddess Pele, but also the ghosts of your own ancestors. You live in a world born of fire, and you never forget it. You'd think the frigid, wind-swept lands of ancient Scandinavia would be too cold and soggy for fiery rituals, but you'd be wrong. For the Norse, the Vikings, fire is not just a comfort against the biting cold, it is a force of cosmic creation and destruction, a central element in their mythology and their lives. You are a Viking farmer, and the world is a place of stark dualities. At the heart of your cosmology is the clash between fire and ice. The universe itself, you believe, was born from the primordial void of Ginnungagap, where the fiery realm of Muspelheim met the frosty realm of Niflheim. When the sparks of Muspelheim touched the ice of Niflheim, they created the first being, the giant Ymir, and from him all life, including the gods, eventually sprang. So, for you, fire isn't just essential for survival, it's a creator, but it is also a destroyer. You know the prophecies of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, the end of the world. And you know that when that day comes, the fire giant Surtur will emerge from Muspelheim, his sword blazing brighter than the sun, and he will burn the entire world to ash. This knowledge gives your relationship with fire a tense, respectful edge. On a more earthly level, your fire festivals mark the crucial turning points of the year, especially the end of the long dark winter and the return of the sun. Your most important fire festival is Yule, a midwinter celebration that will later merge with Christmas. During Yule, you and your family will burn a great log, the Yule log, in your hearth for days on end. This isn't just for warmth. The burning log represents the rebirth of the sun, the victory of light over darkness. The longer it burns, the better your luck will be in the coming year. Lighting the Yule fire isn't just cozy, it's cosmic insurance. During the Midsummer Festival, when the sun is at its peak and the days are longest, you will light huge bonfires on hilltops. The veil between worlds is thin at this time, and the fires are meant to ward off evil spirits, while also celebrating the sun's power. Just like the Celts, you and your fellow villagers will leap over the flames, a practice believed to grant protection, fertility, and maybe the courage to impress your crush. And when it comes to death, fire often has the final word. While not all Vikings are cremated, it is a common and honorable funeral rite. You might see the body of a great chieftain placed on a funeral pyre sometimes, within a ship on land, surrounded by his weapons, tools, and sacrificed animals. As the flames consume the body, you believe the fire is purifying the soul and releasing it, the smoke carrying it upward to the halls of Valhalla or Folkvanga, the afterlife realms for warriors and the chosen. The fire is a farewell, a transformation, and a final dramatic flare. It is a return to the cosmic element from which all life began, a fitting end for a people who lived and died by its power. Across the ancient world, from the sands of Egypt to the forests of Scandinavia, fire wasn't just a life-giving force, it was also a judgmental one. It could warm your home, or it could incinerate your legacy. For many cultures, fire became the ultimate test, a tool of divine justice, spiritual purification, and cosmic reckoning. And unlike in a modern court, there were no appeals. You are in ancient India, and a queen, Sita, the wife of the hero Rama, has just been rescued from the clutches of a demon king. But her trial is not over. To prove her purity and faithfulness after her long captivity, she must undergo the Agni Pariksha, the trial by fire. You watch, your heart in your throat, as she calmly walks into a raging pyre. The flames leap around her, but they do not touch her. The fire god, Agni himself, emerges from the blaze, carrying Sita unharmed, a divine declaration of her innocence. This story from the epic Ramayana, while a mess of gendered expectations to a modern mind, perfectly illustrates how fire was seen as the final arbiter of truth. Now, imagine you are in medieval Europe. The belief in fire's judgment has taken a darker, more brutal form in the trial by ordeal. A person accused of a crime, a theft, a heresy, or witchcraft is forced to undergo a terrifying test. They might have to hold a red-hot iron bar and walk a certain number of paces, or plunge their hand into a cauldron of boiling water. Their wounds are then bandaged and inspected a few days later. If the wounds are healing cleanly, it is a sign from God that they are innocent. If they are festering, they are guilty and will face punishment if they haven't already died from the ordeal itself. While these trials were not spiritually uplifting, they show the lingering, deeply ingrained belief that fire, as a divine element, could reveal a truth that human justice could not. Let's return to Zoroastrian Persia. Here, one of the earliest concepts of fire as a tool of final judgment emerges in the vision of the afterlife. You believe that after death, every soul must cross the Chinvat Bridge, a crossing point that separates the world of the living from the world of the dead. For the righteous, the bridge will be as wide and easy to cross as a broad highway. But for the wicked, it will become as narrow as a razor's edge, and they will fall into the abyss below, a river of molten metal, a fiery, eternal punishment. Even the Aztecs, who worshipped fire with such meticulous devotion, saw it as a cyclical trial. If their new fire ceremony failed, if that crucial spark could not be kindled on the chest of the sacrificial victim, the world could end. The sun would not rise, and the star demons would descend. Fire, once a gift from the gods, could also become their chosen method of cosmic deletion. It was a belief that kept humanity humble and maybe just a little bit flammable. Throughout all these traditions, fire becomes a mirror. What you bring to it, truth, guilt, devotion, or fear, is what it reveals. Whether in a sacred rite meant to renew the cosmos, or a terrifying trial meant to condemn a single soul, fire was the final exam, the ultimate, unblinking judge of the ancient world.